So our research committee is headed by Dr. Mari Spina of MITRE, and she's going to talk near the end. Mari. Our finance committee is chaired by Judah Bennett. And our membership committee is chaired by Barbara Foyero. Barbara? All right. So with that, we're all volunteers, but we're all working together to advance the state of the art of security in this local market. So we talked about the cloud security, the CCSK. So something of note, the CCSK is now available under the GI Bill. So if you have served in the military, you can get the CCSK test exam for free. The instructions are here. Where's Katie? Katie Lewin is our CSA Federal Director. The instructions are here. They will be also on the website. Katie has handouts for you if you would like to take the CCSK exam. She's got the handouts to have that happen and have it covered by the GI Bill. So that's something that's a partnership between CSA and the government. So with that, how do you get involved? So like I said, this is a 100% volunteer chapter. We have several ways to get involved. Research. So we develop research artifacts. You're going to see our first research artifact that we've developed as a chapter, talked about. Dr. Spina is going to introduce that. So you can get involved from a research standpoint about some of the great things we're doing there. Mari will talk about that. And then events. We do these events quarterly. So this is our signature event of the year, our first ever of an event like this, right? We're going to have a panel on a boat. So with that said, you can get involved. Our next meetup is actually going to be in November. We're doing a joint meetup with our partner ISC Squared. We're having Ashley Mayham, the FedRAMP director, and an additional speaker to be named. It'll be at the University of Marymount in Boston campus. The registration for that is bit.ly/CSADC November 2019 meetup. Or go to the Meetup app and click the button. So if you can't remember that, go to the Meetup app and click the button. We turned the event on last night. It's already a quarter full. So highly recommend you guys go ahead and register for that before it fills up. So with that said, I will turn it over to our first speaker, who's going to talk about third-party risk. So with that, please invite Kelsey to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. Can y'all hear me? Is that better? All right, great. Turn up a little. I'll just hold a little bit closer. My name is Kelsey Naschek. I'm with OneTrust. It's a privacy, security, and third-party risk management software platform. I lead our solutions engineering team for our third-party risk management offering, so working very closely with our product and R&D teams, as well as alongside our couple of thousand at this point, about 3,000 customers that we have. So today, talking briefly with my fire around some of the most pressing third-party risk management challenges and really how the organizations that we work with overcome them. So the way that I'm going to walk through this is really kind of thinking through the three priorities that we see customers focus on to overcome some of those challenges when they're managing the third parties that they share information with, and assessing those third parties from a privacy perspective and from a security perspective. So the three aspects that we're seeing our customers really focus and prioritize in terms of operationalizing are first from an assessment standpoint. So assessing the risks of the organizations that they work with. A lot of them actually use the Cloud Security Alliance Cake. We offer it within our tool. We have it as a template so they can assess their third parties with a web-based form kind of experience. The third parties fill it out, and we can automatically flag risks so that they can track and manage the risks of those third parties that they work with. We also have an exchange of information. So we're seeing customers really want to leverage almost crowdsourced information so then they're not having to manually go through and research every one of those third parties or vendors that they're working with. Leverage an exchange or a database of information as just one of those sources when they're trying to determine, to what degree of due diligence makes sense for this vendor or this third party that I'm working with. And then the last piece is monitoring. So the nature of your business changes over time, and the nature of the third parties that you work with, their business changes over time. Their privacy programs change, their security programs change. So it's really important that you have some sort of way of monitoring it, whether it's automated reassessments on an annual basis. Maybe you're getting notified when their ISO 27001 certificate that you relied on expired, or maybe their CSA star expired and they didn't renew that. So it's important to have some sort of alerting. And then in the context of privacy, since I know that's kind of one of the big topics tonight, is what about if the third party that you're working with experiences some sort of data breach or regulatory enforcement activity? So are there any ways that you're proactively getting notified of those different kinds of breaches or enforcements? So in terms of where we see customers kind of focus on when it comes to managing their third parties is at different parts in that third-party risk management lifecycle. So all the way from beginning when you're onboarding vendors, this is going to be kind of the best time for you to get information from them is before you've actually signed the contract and handed over money. This is the best time to understand what do their programs look like, actually get them to answer any of the different questionnaires that you're sending over. Also leveraging an exchange of information, being able to right size the degree of due diligence that you're doing by understanding, what certifications do they have, what is their inherent risk level look like. From there, actually assessing the different vendors. So whether it's sending out different assessments, whether it's on-site audits, remote audits to understand what does their program look like, what controls do they actually have in place, and any of the risks identified with their programs so that you can track those risks. You can mitigate the risk, whether you're flagging those gaps back up for the vendors in order to handle themselves, or you put mitigating controls in place. And then what about the exceptions to those risks? So being able to automatically monitor those over time. And that's where reporting comes in. So leveraging tools to do a lot of this work kind of supports the reporting. So moving away from spreadsheets makes it a little bit easier to automate a lot of these processes, to visualize this information. Again, kind of that monitoring and automated reassessment that kind of comes in as well. And I know because I had kind of a fire round, I just spoke through all these instead of going through the slides. So I'm going to skip through. These are all the points that I just hit. And so I'm going to pause there. I know I don't really have time for questions, but I will be here all night. And that is everything that I've got for you guys. So please feel free to come up to me. I've got a colleague here as well. And thanks again for having us.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. And now for our main event of the evening, I'd like to invite Bob Breeze up to moderate a panel on the boundary of security and privacy. Bob.
Thanks, Neil. Get away from me. All right, that should be better. Okay, I'm going to ask Anil to do something for me. We used to work together several years ago, and the reason I'm up here is because I probably owed him for something. But we are going to have some time for some Q&A at the end of the panel. Anil said I could use the entire hour to let these folks impart their knowledge and amazing insights on you. But in order to make the Q&A process work a little better, I have these custom handmade cards. So if you do come up with a question during the course of the event, you can write that down. You can get it over to Anil, and he'll pass those to me. And that'll be better than having someone come up to do the traditional pontification about their own personal viewpoints on privacy, and then, as Alan Power would do during RSA, ask, is there a question? So Anil, I'll give you that. Anyhow, so I'm Bob Breeze. I currently work at Gartner as an executive partner, formerly the CIO at Department of Energy, where I was also sentenced as the senior agency official for privacy. Those are my entire qualifications to be here. But I will take time to introduce those who we really care about. As soon as I find my notes here. Here we go. All right. So first of all, directions to the panel. Are your mics on?
I think so. I think so.
Okay. Very good. All right. First of all, in the middle, Ron Ross. Ron probably needs no introduction.
Yeah.
Okay?
Weighing in at.
He's a national treasure. Okay. He's a fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, focusing on information security, systems security engineering, risk management, leads the FISMA implementation project. He's probably worked with every director and secretary of any agency in town, as well as a number of private sector entities as well. So what does Ron really love, though? He loves NASA and NASCAR. Why is that? because they have great system engineering approaches to high risk, high potential impact activities. And Ron's got some opinions about systems engineering approaches to cybersecurity and privacy. We'll probably hear a little bit about that tonight. Terrence Jackson. Terrence, raise your hand. Thank you, sir. Graduated from Howard with a degree in Management Information Systems, currently the Chief Information Security Officer at Thycotic Software. Protecting organizations' information assets and managing enterprise risk. More than 17 years of experience doing this CISO and risk management type role. In his free time, Terrence, we always like to do something interesting, right? Because we know everybody's a security expert here. But in his free time, Terrence serves on the AV and social media ministry at his church and enjoys spending time with his wife and family, including his teenage son and 6-year-old daughter. And he's also featured in the widely published book, Tribe of Hackers, okay? So I'm not sure if he's the chief of the tribe or just a member of the tribe. All right, Sean, raise your hand, sir. I'm not going to make any jokes about Sean because I was told that making jokes about your panelists is bad form. If there are going to be any jokes about the panelists, they'll make them themselves. But Sean serves as the vice president and CISO at Freddie Mac. All right?
Yeah,
He's got his own entourage here. They'll clap for him. They'll applaud. And they'll make sure that
I owe
you
them
think what he's
drinks.
saying is really good and important. He also served as the CISO for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, was the Director of Cyber for the Department of Navy, Chief Information Officer, and has held other leadership roles at DoD, Navy, and Army. He is a fellow with the American Council for Technology and adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon. His passion is his 5-month-old daughter. His second passion is sleep, which he doesn't get any of. And finally, Anthony Johnson, the former CISO at a number of Fortune 100 companies, currently a managing partner at his own company, Delve Risk. You can talk with him more about that later. My guess is it would probably be an interesting conversation. He's led some of the largest global cyber programs in financial services, and he's passionate about addressing the issues of underrepresentation of diverse leaders within technology and specifically cybersecurity. So welcome, panelists.
Thank you.
All right, since I work at Gartner, I have to give you at least a couple of strategic planning assumptions about privacy that I think are kind of sobering. By the end of 2020, this is probably not a surprise, the backup and archiving of personal data will represent the largest area of privacy risk for more than 70% of all organizations. You know you have that stuff stashed away in your data centers and in the cloud, so part of tonight we'll be talking about what you're going to do about that. Through 2021, social media scandals and security breaches will have effectively zero lasting consumer impact. So as much as you gripe about it, zero consumer impact by the end of 2021. And by 2023, e-privacy regulation will increase online costs by minimizing the use of cookies and other techniques, crippling the current internet ad revenue system. Interesting. All right, so let's get to the meat of this. We're going to start with Terrence. We read about privacy breaches every day, and there's usually some immediate outrage. Maybe the company decides, well, we'll do credit monitoring for everybody, but it kind of dies down, the stock price returns, and in fact, in the 6 largest breaches over the last 5 years, the only stock price that hasn't returned is Marriott because it's less than a year old. So Terrence, do companies even care? How do we make them care?
You mentioned the interesting statistic by the end of 2021, the consumers really won't care about the data breaches. So I think it has to be a consumer-led effort to effect change. If you look at the Facebook fine from the FTC, which was $5 billion, you just mentioned Marriott, their GDPR fine leveraged by the ICO is $123 billion. Money hits them in the pockets. That's what's going to make them care. And if they're offering a product or service, and we as consumers stop patronizing that product or service and stop consuming it, they have to take notice.
Any other thoughts on
I'll
that,
take a little
Anthony?
bit of a different view. I think that companies won't be incentivized to care, and so let me just kind of take that angle a little bit. Largely because most organizations can and will be able to insure away a lot of that risk with financial impact. So with cyber aspects of cyber insurance, I do think that if the economics.
Pull your mic up a little bit closer there, Ian. Yeah.
Is that better? Moderately? All right, I'll hold this for now. Okay, cool.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, so I think that until the economics are actually shifted, so as a consumer, if there is some sort of a breach, we largely don't care because the companies have gotten so good at making it smooth. So my credit card gets hacked, by the next day I have a brand new credit card. I just swipe that one instead of the one I had. If the economics and user experience were to the point of where, as a user, you had to then reapply for the credit card, companies would dramatically care, I think, because it would impact their user experience, and they wouldn't be able to, assign the risks to some other aspect of an insurance organization. I think they'll do the things because of the regulations that are going to be coming out, but it's less and less about the consumer as we move forward.
I would add to that. So in the financial sector, Freddie Mac, we're a Fortune 38 company, and when you think about the financial risks, you have credit, market. I'm loud. You have credit, market, and liquidity risk, and so those can have huge swings. You don't want to take a $2 billion liquidity crunch or credit swing, and that really impacts the balance sheet. When we think about operational risk, where cyber, IT outages, other types of things, the numbers aren't as significant as what you would see in the financial risk side. So if that equation starts to shift over time, and it really depends on, do we have the apathy, the consumer apathy, or we have a generation of people who are who don't really care, in a sense. They already put all that stuff, their information out freely, where they'll give away their information for an iPad raffle. So what's that? There's a polarity there. But until we see from a regulatory, or if they make the economics of protecting data, because at some point there's going to be some significant impact, whether it's at a nation state or large crime effort. I mean, it's going to have some significant impact, and that's what's going to drive up the costs, similar to what we see with like a financial crisis with a liquidity problem.
So Sean, I'd like to dig into that a little bit. So in 2017, there were 16.7 million identity fraud victims. Not people who just had their data breached, but people who actually had some negative impact on their life. And yet we continue to trade our privacy for convenience. Why is that?
Yeah, it's when you think about the suite of cognitive biases that we have, it's immediate gratification bias, right? Hey, what can I do now, or what do I need to give up and subscribe now to get an immediate gratification, where maybe I don't care as much about my data going somewhere else. But I think at some point where I think there's going to be a crossover rate where there will be some greater impact to the broader user population, where some people just don't care. Where hey, we have OPM breach. I think there's a VA breach. I think I have like 3 or 4 credit monitoring services now, as a lot of people do. And are we apathetic about it? But what are the secondary and tertiary effects that we're not considering? I think at some point those risks may manifest themselves.
I would just add an example to that. About 2 weeks ago, I was out shopping, and typically when you go to check out the cash register point of sale, they'll ask you for your phone number. This particular retailer did something I'd never seen before. Maybe you guys have seen it, but they incentivized me with a 10% discount for me to offer up my email address. And I had to pause and think about that. They're willing to, offer a financial incentive for something that's seemingly trivial to me, email address. So obviously the clerk didn't know the questions that I was about to start asking, and she didn't have good answers for him. But
She asked the wrong person.
that's the wrong person. But that's just something to think about when you go back to just trading, privacy for convenience. At what point do we stop doing that? If you look at, Facebook's lapses in privacy with the Cambridge Analytica situation. You know, I would go as far as to say most of the people in this room probably have some sort of presence on social media. If you have children, present company included, how many of us have posted pictures of our children? And you know, you really don't think about the implications of that long term. If you look at what's happening now with the deepfake technology, what's the long-term implications of those images being used to do something nefarious, or to, you know, later down the line that the technology evolves, they'll be able to do something with that if we delve more into biometric authentication.
So Ron, there's no national privacy law. We've got GDPR on the EU side. We've got CCPA in California. We have 50 states working on 150 different state laws. How can standards begin to help us solve this problem? This has been wildly successful with the cybersecurity framework. What about privacy?
Well, that's a great question. Privacy is a big deal to us at NIST, and we've been working since 2012. We first had our first set of privacy controls in NIST 853. It was in Appendix J. Moving forward to NIST 850 Rev 5, we've got now a full integration of privacy controls in all of our flagship publications that we're building. So we don't have a privacy framework yet, but we're getting close to having one. There's been work for the last probably 6 to 8 months where our NIST team has worked with almost everybody in the private sector, same type of setup as the cybersecurity framework, workshops in different cities, universities, getting input from consumers on what a good privacy framework would look like. While all that's going on, eventually that framework's going to get completed and it'll stand side by side with the cybersecurity framework. And I believe at that point, you'll see a marrying up of our NIST 853 and all of the state-of-the-art privacy controls that are in that document now. It's getting close to being finished, but it's still under review. So I think the combination of a framework and good privacy controls, state-of-the-art, that is going to go a long way with policies at the federal level. We have OMBA 130, which talks about privacy and security. We don't have any laws per se yet, except going back to 1974, the original Privacy Act, which is still in force. But the combination of all of those things, I think, will give consumers the tools they need to help protect consumers from a privacy perspective.
So I feel like I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, just making sure. So I think that standards like NIST, assessment tools, methodologies, bodies, I think they are very useful. However, when you look at 42% of US GDP is small to medium businesses, there's effectively a paywall to be able to access the talent and technology to really secure their enterprises. And as we build out great standards and privacy and security become more and more legislated, it becomes a huge cost of business for small to medium businesses because they just can't afford to do that. And so it becomes this very interesting question of can they keep up in this world? And what happens to all of these? I think it's 98% of the number of businesses are considered SMB. So it's just an interesting challenge of how it all work out.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, from the regulation point, my view is that I don't want to have to comply with 50 different regulations, right? Or eventually we would just take the high bar and then let it apply across the board. The thought is, and I know there's some pretty good legislation on the Hill that I think can solve this. But will we get to an agreement just given all the other topics on the agenda, on the docket? I think there are a couple of good ones out there that would make sense, that whether it's data breach notification, privacy notification. Yeah, on the SMB part, I completely agree. There are challenges there, and I think we have to come up with, there has to be some sort of, is it partly government? Is it partly, you know, utility or private sector? To how do we help and protect these small, medium-sized business? And that's where, whether it's taking advantage of scalable, distributed, immutable, ephemeral type assets where you can make it easy to scale, easy to adopt and consume, and hopefully lower cost. I mean, what's that? I think it's a polarity that we're going to struggle with for quite a while.
So Terrence, blockchain has a lot of hype these days. Does blockchain have a role in being able to create an underlying technological solution to solving some of these, or is that not it?
I think it's honestly too early to tell. Blockchain does offer mechanisms to validate the integrity of the information. If you look at what is going on in Estonia right now with their EIDs, their government is largely digital. They do electronic voting. Their medical records are online, and they're using blockchain to track who touches what piece of data and track why. I don't think the technology has been developed yet to tie that to the confidentiality of the data. There are a couple of companies out there that are close, but for widespread adoption, I think it's still a lot of uncertainty.
Okay. Ron, you got a thought about that?
I would agree. I think this gets to kind of the question of the evening, the boundary between cybersecurity and privacy. One of the first things that we encountered when we started doing our integration project at NIST, for years and decades, we've had cybersecurity. We know it's about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, 3 pillars. When we first started working with privacy, we said, how much of this stuff really overlaps? And it turns out that one of the Fair Information Practice Principles, the FIPS, the other FIPS, one of those is actually security. And where we have a common overlap is in the area of confidentiality. So when it comes to unauthorized disclosure of PII, for example, security folks are all about that, and so are privacy folks. That's where we have a common intersection of the two disciplines. However, the privacy practice, they also worry about the authorized uses of PII. So what can authorized SAOPs do with your privacy data? How much data can they collect on you? How long can they keep it? What can they do with it? So that's where we have this kind of melding of the two worlds. They both do different things. There's some common overlap. And I think the different things like blockchain, that can certainly help with integrity, but it doesn't solve availability and confidentiality problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just a reminder, so I have my first question card. So for those of you that have questions in your mind, be sure to write them down in nice, neat handwriting. Thank you. So Ron, with that, I'm going to come back to you because this question is kind of down that same thread. And so the question is regarding a potential privacy framework, isn't privacy control about also tying in a legal or consent-based construct, and has NIST incorporated some of these constructs in your thinking?
Yeah, that's another good question, and the answer is yes. When we took our original 8 families of privacy controls, we have a whole privacy team at NIST that took those 8 families, and they kind of consolidated a lot of the controls. We only have one privacy family remaining in 853. It does consider things like consent and all of those things that deal specifically with the authorized uses of PII. The other privacy controls in those 8 families went to our PM family because PM is our program management family, and most of our privacy controls operate at the enterprise level. They're not tied to specific systems. And then the third thing we found is some of those privacy controls can do dual duty with a security control. Like, for example, in our awareness and training control, AT2, we now have a single control that deals with privacy and security awareness and training. Same control, it just serves 2 different purposes. So we're blending the 2 disciplines, and we're keeping the distinct parts where we need to, tying back to legislation and policy. And I think we're going to fit right in with GDPR, and I think the controls we have in Rev 5 will be more than enough to satisfy the GDPR concerns.
Yeah, just to add to that, just from the execution side, when we think about CCPA, GDPR, it does, I mean, as we execute, we've adopted NIST, and that's what we leverage for our organization. And as we look at CCPA, most of the confidentiality pieces, if you're doing you have the right controls in place, you're going to be good to go from a confidentiality perspective. The biggest nuances and changes are, to your point, to your question, Bob, are the notification, the call lines that somebody needs. You need to be able to respond to somebody within a certain amount of time. You need to be able to have data lineage. That's another piece there. So there are some areas of, when we think about the privacy legislation, that go beyond security, where now we partner with our data governance teams. Yeah, how do we think about critical data elements, connected elements throughout the enterprise about a particular person? Those are all the key tenets that, while the security controls from a privacy and confidentiality perspective are met, there are other elements of these privacy frameworks that are just as critical.
You used an interesting word, though. You said consent. And what I find really fascinating is that a lot of the times the people that are granting consent don't actually know what they're consenting to, right? So it's this whole notion of this end user license agreement. I'm like, absolutely, I want to use software. I'm going to buy this thing. I'm going to click yes. And then all of a sudden, someone comes and they're like, oh, you sold your house to us for $1. And I'm like, I did not realize that, right? So I think that users aren't taking the time, and they're probably ill-equipped to even understand what they're agreeing to. So, so we are going to have to also face that demon as well, what that really means.
Simplified agreements.
Yeah. So
Simplified
Google spent a
agreements.
lot of money this week putting a number of full-page ads in at least the Washington Post about, we care about your privacy, going back to the original question of, do companies actually care? I'm not sure I learned anything from those ads, but one thing I did get this week is, as I was working to log on to a system, it said I could use my Google credentials as my identity solution to log in. And so I said, okay, sure, I'll do that. And then and the next question was, this will give this site access to your contacts. And I'm like, what? I'll find another way to get the information I need. I mean, why do you need my Google contacts? It's kind of interesting when we look at that, Ron.
Yeah, this presents, we started out the discussion of why is privacy difficult, and it's really the same reason security is difficult. And I take it back to, we've all grown up, well, people my age have grown up in the world of kinetic space. The World Trade Center, when those attacks happened on 9/11, we kind of have that image etched in our heads. When we talk about cybersecurity, it operates in cyberspace. It's largely invisible. Everything in cyber is about a black box. It's your smartphone. It's your tablet. It's that laptop. And what goes on inside that black box is largely invisible to most of us. That complexity is really the underlying issue, I think, going forward in the 21st century for security and privacy. And I'll just give you one anecdote. Since you brought up Google and Gmail, we have an automated travel system called E2. I'll go on there and make my reservations. I was flying down to Huntsville, Alabama about a year ago, and I flew into Nashville, which is the closest southwest city to Huntsville. And on my profile, I have my secretary and my wife. They both want to know where I am at all times. So within 5 minutes of me clicking that reservation at my desk, my wife, who has a Gmail account, got an email that said, great places to visit when you're in Huntsville and Nashville, Tennessee. Now, she didn't even open up that email, so I'm wondering, how did that happen? So I think the answer is exactly as you described. Somewhere along the line, we opted in without knowing it. And I think that the big lesson for privacy going forward is we have to make sure that we are aware when we're opting in. And instead of having it automatic, it should be just the opposite. You should have to actually make sure you understand what you're agreeing to before we go forward in that great invisible black box, which we know nothing about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're here on CSA DC boat cruise, so we probably should have a cloud question. What do you think? Yes. All right. So now, over to the cloud. So traditionally, security boundaries have been fairly well understood because they were in our data center, right? Now, with the deployment of infrastructure as a service, platform, software, data as a service, security as a service, how's the traditional boundary changing, and what's the expected future impact that's going to have on how you and others as CISOs and privacy officials meet your mandate, meet your customers' expectations for privacy while deploying these awesome, scalable solutions?
So,
Open question.
Go on, Terrence. Go on,
Sorry.
Terrence.
Great question. As you mentioned, the traditional boundary has eroded. So I take the approach more so identity is now a part of the new perimeter as well as data. Most of the panelists, I hope, would agree that most of what we're protecting is data. That is the most valuable asset that most of our organizations have, whether it's financial data, PII, IP, is data. And if you go back, you mentioned all the SaaS platforms, the infrastructure as a service platforms. Not to pick on Amazon, but most of the recent issues you've seen with a lot of the cloud providers have been with insecure S3 buckets. And I think that just goes back to the shared security model of it's the cloud, but it's still somebody else's computer, but understanding where the organization's responsibilities start and the providers stop and filling that gap. Just because it's not in your physical data center in your boundary doesn't mean you don't have to have the compensating controls or still have policies and standards governing who has access, proper identity and access management systems. Are you encrypting your data, while it's there? So you just have to, I guess for the most part, it's really plan out your transition to the cloud and still implement those same types of controls you would have if it was in your physical data center.
So if I may, and I agree with many of the points Terrence made, although S3 buckets are a customer responsibility. So how I look at it, normally, when you think about your current on-prem environments, I look at it like an old house, right? I feel like I'm always I have all this technical debt. I'm spackling holes in the wall. I'm fixing the toilet, and I mean, you have decades of technical debt. That unless you're a new startup or something where you have to deal with and repipe, et cetera, where the opportunity as we move forward with our journey is you get to build a new foundation and a new house. And if you do it right and build up the spec and build the code, and when I say code, I mean, hey, automation. When you think about, hey, how do you look at deviations in the environment? I have 3 principles, right? I look at it. You need to be distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. How do I have assets where you don't care about them in a sense that from a stability, reliability, resilience, I can blow them away on a regular basis, and any deviation from what I've set, I can flag and either prevent that, I can alert, I can move on that. And so while the traditional model, it won't give you the agility. And as I look at for most digital transformations that probably most companies are going through, as we go on ours, like we want to use drones for appraisals. We want to be able to push code and applications and features within a matter of hours and not a matter of weeks and months. So how do we make sure we do that smartly? And that's where we've look at everything from our DevSecOps pipeline. How do you integrate security into the CI/CD pipeline? So as people are checking in code, it's being scanned, you're throwing it back into Jira backlog, and so you can have the agility to move code in the environment. And then when you build the environment, everything down from the cloud formation template, do I need to lint that template on a regular basis to make sure I have, every time you stand up a template, I'm going to grab identities, it's tokenized, I'm going to have encryption, I'm going to have all the policies up there. And then you have the infrastructure monitoring, everything down to if you're a Docker or Kubernetes shop, hey, from your mesh policies to your container security. I think when you think about the stack, most of these companies are companies and solutions that are 3, 4, 5 years old. So the stack that we used on premise, only a couple of the capabilities moved to the cloud with us, and everything else is a rebuilding of that stack. But I think it gives us more security. It gives us the where I don't have to monitor and have to have that alert fatigue on my SIM, because I can automate and eliminate the probability of most of these events happening, and then I can focus my runbooks, my hunt teams on the things that matter and the true anomalous activities. So it's kind of our approach to it, and but it's in combination with the DevSecOps model as you rebuild your infrastructure in the cloud.
So, go ahead, Anthony, because I want to come to you on a specific item there.
Sure. So what I was just going to add on to that is I think as an industry, and more and more when you talk to security leaders today, a lot of people like to say, and this is the buzz for the words that drive me crazy is, I used to be technical, but now I'm not. And the reason why that's so dangerous in the ecosystem of where we're moving to is that the tech teams, the dev teams, their leadership teams are remaining very technical, and they will make decisions on how it's being orchestrated, on which AMIs, the entire build pipeline, the entire process. And as security leaders, if we say, I used to be technical, but now I'm not, we don't get invited to those conversations.
Absolutely.
And it's for good business reason they won't invite us to the conversation. So I think that it's really incumbent upon us to both stay aware of the technology. You know, there's some great partners and vendors here, sitting down, understanding what they're going on. You can buy me a drink later. And really look at where the ecosystem is going.
Absolutely. Really
And
great.
so Anthony, you're advising CISOs now in your new role. How do you help them understand the importance of privacy and its connection to the rest of their security plan and their risk management plan? Because all the excitement and hype is still around traditional cybersecurity, regardless of how we actually accomplish it. How do you, as a CISO advisor, help them understand the role that privacy has in this?
Sure. So I think one of the fundamental things that I end up doing is, and this is it's a little bit, it caught me off guard at first, is the amount of time you have to spend with security leaders to actually understand the business that they're in. And it's not the business that they think they're in. And the example I love to use is going back in the days, Ashley Madison breach. Right? They thought they were in the business of credit card processing, and that was not their business. Their business was privacy of their users. And so, you know, all their stuff was PCI compliant. They had that impact. But man, it would have been a lot better if they would have encrypted those email addresses, right, for the organization. So fundamentally understanding the business that you're in, and then looking at what are the trade-offs that we're willing to do. You know, when you talk to boards and, you know, as part of the advisory components, talking to boards and talking about risk tolerance, people will say, you know, we have zero appetite for security risk. Okay.
You don't get anything done.
You don't get anything done.
Impossible.
And when you know, when I was at JP Morgan, we wrote off $2 billion a year in credit card, you know, fraud. We didn't want credit card fraud, but it's $2 billion. So there was an appetite of up to $2 billion, because if it was $3 billion, there would have been new programs that go into place to kind of get that down to something else. So part of this is understanding the organization's risk tolerance, and the same for the privacy tolerance, and how you work through that.
Absolutely.
So Ron, social security numbers used to be a big deal. Now it's thumbprints, iris scans, facial scans. Like, we can now check into our flights and get on board without a boarding pass, just with a facial scan. What's happening? Where's this going?
You're leaving a huge digital footprint wherever you go. That's what's happening. And I think the consumer's awareness of that digital footprint is critical. You talked about this has to be consumer driven. If you think back about the automobile industry, where we've come, my first car barely had a seatbelt. And from that time, through a combination of regulation and companies just wanting to produce safer cars for their customers, we've gone through a literal evolution of safety features, from airbags, steel reinforced doors, now all the sensors that are on the cars. And now, you know, you don't have to install your own airbag. You know, it's expected that the vendors are going to do that. So I think the awareness of consumers and driving the understanding of how serious this problem is, and forcing industry to take steps to make it better. And I think from a NIST perspective, our risk management framework, we've evolved that now to include not only cybersecurity, but also privacy, and I'll give a shout out to Jennifer, supply chain. All three areas, managing all three of those types of risks in one framework, is our first step toward moving toward ERM, enterprise-wide risk management, where you've got greater visibility to all of those things. And the last thing I'll say about Ashley Madison, I just wanted to make a comment about that. That's actually a funny story, because there were 3 breaches that happened right in a row starting in 2015. And luckily, I mean, the first one we all know, OPM. I was a part of that one. Many of you were as well. The second one was the Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, federal employee, healthcare records. That was number 2 for me. I've got more credit protection than I know what to do with now. The third breach that happened that I wasn't part of, the one you mentioned, was Ashley Madison. But why were those 3 targets, why were those 3 breaches important for the adversary? Because the adversary wants a target list of all federal employees who have top secret or top secret SCI clearances who have embarrassing health care issues and are cheating on their spouses. That's a target list that's out there today. And there could be 10,000 people on that list, and the adversaries only have to turn 1 or 2%. And I'll never know unless they sit down next to me at a Panera or a Starbucks and say, hey, Ron, we've got something that's really bad about you that we can make go away if you'll do this for us. That's the invisible footprint I'm talking about. We don't realize today how deep that footprint goes and how vulnerable we really are as a society, our technologies, the intellectual property we're bleeding out through all of the bad things that happen through exfiltration. And it's a real serious problem. And I think cloud is one of the bright spots of how we can actually start to solve this problem. Technology, great controls that are being integrated by the cloud providers, that is going to help us get to a better state long term. So I'm optimistic long term.
And so hot news, 2 hours old, DoorDash, 4.9 million records. So if you're using DoorDash,
I just happened.
Dashed out
dash
the
to
door.
some credit monitoring.
Change your password.
You can't even take a cruise.
I do think that for every time we get hacked, we should get a choice of like a Spotify or a Netflix account for a year, because I don't need another credit monitor.
So as we continue to move forward through this journey with biometrics, the surveillance state, reputational monitoring, we also have, and Sean, you kind of raised this at the beginning, of the difference of viewpoints between those of us that are in Ron's and my age group and folks that are in probably your age group and certainly your daughter as she starts to grow up. How are shifting mindsets going to potentially shape where we go with privacy?
Yeah. That's a great question. You know, when I look at it, I think, you know, Ron said it earlier, is it going to take some sort of major event that's going to drive that shift in thinking? You know, you have folks that give away their data. Are we going to have a swing back? Is there going to be something that's going to drive or some sort of catalyst that now gets people focused and seeing that, hey, this is a bigger issue that we now need to pay attention to? When I think about cybersecurity, it follows like epidemiology, like any type of disease outbreak or an earthquake of some sort. It's a low burn until it's the most important thing ever, right? And I think there's going to be a turning point where whether it's going to be that now this is the most important thing ever, and we're going to have a shift in how we're going to approach it.
So Ron, we have a role as kind of the caretakers of the future of privacy. Some of that, you've talked a lot about systems engineering approaches to things, but as we build up and we have CI/CD pipelines and DevOps and all that, how do we encourage people to write better code and to take privacy seriously every time we create another digital experience?
That's the difficult question because we don't like to regulate much of anything. We do regulate when we have to, but with the software industry, we've chosen not to go down that road because it can stifle innovation. And the United States is a leader in cloud technology and all the other things that we've always, it's in our DNA to be innovative. But I think at some point, I think you're right, we're going to have to come to a reckoning that the world that we're building, I grew up in a kinetic world. I got under my desk when I was 10 years old to save myself from a nuclear attack. Not that that would have done any good, but today,
the asbestos would have saved you.
That's what we're talking about. My kids are millennials, and they are operating in a totally different space today with cyber. And that invisibility of the cyber problem, the fact it's in the black box, and that complexity is largely hidden, I think the only way you get your arms around this, and I really give a kudos out to the Cloud Alliance, the Cloud Security Alliance, and all the cloud community because they focus on architecture. If you go to any of the big cloud providers, they build a cloud architecture, and it's all about system elements within that large system boundary. And that traditional boundary that we've grown up with, that went away not just last year, it went away about 2 decades ago. As soon as we started hooking up computers, that boundary started to erode. And you don't have the moat around the castle anymore, but good architecture and good engineering, as exhibited by the cloud providers, and a good set of privacy and security controls integrated effectively with consumers taking their responsibility. You mentioned about having, this is a dual responsibility. The feds are always responsible for federal data no matter where it is. If it's in Google's cloud or Amazon's cloud or whoever's cloud, it's a dual responsibility. So if you're worried about personnel security, you're worried about the personnel that are accessing that cloud, making sure those folks are trustworthy. But I'm also concerned about the system admin at Google. Are they trustworthy? So you have those dual responsibilities. But we can work these problems out. This is a management problem and things that can be well mapped out with good architecture, good engineering. And that big prize that we all get with cloud is you can provision your needs to support the mission. And you can do it with state-of-the-art technology, which can save you money at the same time. And that should be music to every CIO's ear. Going back to your days, Bob, at Energy, if I could have told you you can save 40% going to the cloud, you say, wow, that's awesome. Let's get on with business. But that risk, we have to get by that initial risk-adverse mindset that we all have because of where we come from.
I would submit on the software side of it, I think quality is going to change where it's not about just pushing out features. The quality of a software developer, and it's not like it's shame management, maybe it is, where it's like if you're pushing out poor, vulnerable code, you're not a good developer. And so how do we change that how do we get that cultural mindset? And I mean, we have tools where we have spell check for developers in their IDE, right? So you go in your IDE.
Tabs, not spaces. Tabs, not spaces.
Yeah, no. and if they're pushing out and as they check in code every night and they're having a bunch of errors and a bunch of SQL cross-site issues in their code, they go back. It gets kicked back to them, and we track that through whatever tracking you want to use, right? Whatever suite you're anchored on. And so you can start to see if these developers are consistently pushing out poor code, you're going to see those who are going to rise, who are getting better, pushing out better code, developing code, as they're going to be able to push software through that pipeline so much faster when the other guys are do not pass go. And then it's going to be a quality where people are held accountable for it. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and they have other types of gamification of code out there. So there are tools and other elements out there that help drive that to make it more competitive so people can push out better code.
So I've got a question I want to direct to you, Terrence, to kind of kick off, and then after this one, I have one final question I want to ask each of you, and then we'll kind of tie a bow on this, okay? So Terrence, we do a lot of continuous monitoring, a lot of threat-based intelligence and that around traditional cyber attacks, going after our intellectual property and that competitive data and that kind of stuff. Where are we today in your mind on providing the same type of attention to privacy, and what will it take to get companies to provide the same type of continuous breach assessment and threat intelligence?
I think as consumers, we're going to have to honestly demand it. So let me do an unscientific poll. When it was announced that the Echo, Amazon had humans, monitoring the recordings, the snippets that were coming in via the Echo, how many people actually unplugged them, turned them off, and never used it again? One. Two.
What if you never had, what if never will? For a day.
So how many people, when they announced that you could opt out of that feature, but it may inconvenience you because the voice recognition may not be as accurate, how many of you opted out?
Yep, one again.
How many people in here have iPhones? How many people disable Siri?
Oh, a few more.
That's a little bit better response. But that just kind of goes to show you, if nothing changes, nothing changes. If we're still willing to trade off, convenience for privacy, companies will not have an incentive to change. We are all credit monitored to death. There are some companies that are, Apple, going back to that, they touted their privacy stance, but even they've made mistakes when they had people listening to Siri. I think that there's a lot of room for improvement, but if companies don't have a financial incentive to actually change, whether that be reputational or a competitive advantage driven by us, the consumer, it's just going to be business as usual. That's just my opinion.
I don't think it's actually going to happen. The reason being is that consumers, us, we value ease of use and comfort more than anything else. I would say the U.S. is, one of the most educated nations in the world. We're also one of the most obese nations in the world. And it's not because we don't know that eating pizza is bad for you, but it's just easy, it's comfortable, so we do it. And if we can't take something as fundamental as like physical health, it's definitely not going to happen in something as remote or abstract as cyber health. So I think that at some point, organizations or government will have to make the decision for consumers and say, no, you're not allowed to do that, or no, bartering your privacy information for access to a platform is no longer an acceptable mechanism of currency. So I think that there'll have to be some aspect that'll solve that bridge for consumers.
Yeah, maybe websites should have like the Surgeon General warning. The privacy officer of the United States
It's gonna
says
go
using
there,
this
and
website is hazardous to your privacy.
It will, absolutely.
And people will still click.
They will.
Still click.
They're like, ah,
All right.
one more like.
Yeah. Last question, and we'll just we'll ask each of you to answer this. One short piece of tangible advice regarding privacy. It can be geared towards a CISO, privacy officer, or a consumer. It can be one or all, but what's your short piece of advice? The last half of that question is, what's your preferred reporting relationship between the CEO, the CISO, and the CIO and that privacy official? Are they separate reportees to the CEO? Are they reporting to the CIO, the all-powerful CIO? Or what? We'll start with you, Terrence.
Oh man, that was a two-part question. So let me see.
Let me go back. Tangible piece of advice. Your favorite preferred reporting structure for all of these C-suiters involved in information and information protection.
Read, and read. Read what you're opting into. Read EULAs. Be aware of the implications if the data is exposed or leaked. Conduct risk assessments and exercises. And as far as the reporting structure, I think traditionally the C-suite has been very siloed when it comes to the CIO and the CISO and reporting structure. Risk is the organization, the business owns risk, and the CIO and the CISO need to coexist instead of traditionally, the CISO, we run scans and run risk reports and assessments, and we lob it over the fence to the CIO and hey, fix this. And there's really not a lot of collaborative dialogue going on. So it definitely needs to be more of a collaborative effort. And I do believe they should both report to the CEO.
Okay. Ron, two-part question. Tangible advice.
Can
And
we
if you
answer
have a
them in either
reporting
order?
structure.
Is there any order?
Either order.
Okay.
Don't matter.
So the FISMA answer is the CISO is hardwired under the CIO, which you know very well. The real answer should be, I think, the CIO, the CISO, and the Chief Privacy Officer, I think should be direct reports to the CEO. And the reason that's important is because it's not just about CIO and technology now. Privacy issues and security issues go beyond the technology. And I think the risks that are inherent in putting those all into the stovepipe, sometimes those issues that the CIO deals with, that you've dealt with before, can override the privacy or security without that oversight of the CEO, the ultimate risk taker in the organization. So I would spread them out and I would make them all direct reports. The privacy advice, I would say, understand your responsibilities to your people as far as how to protect their privacy. And that may mean going out and looking at the requirements in GDPR. It may be going to A130, the federal policy, just understanding what the policy says, and then go into the NIST publication. Look at the privacy controls and look across all of those families and what the different types of controls are and why they're needed and how you can envision implementing those to help your organization protect individuals, and that's my best advice.
I'm coming to you last, Sean.
Okay.
Awesome.
Dan?
So the advice I would say is just to couch it. I always think it's important to give people, if you share some knowledge, right, then maybe they'll kind of respect you a little bit more on, hey, you actually care about me. So hopefully this is something everyone can share. I do think that if you have kids under 18, looking at their credit reports, freezing their credit reports, or particularly putting monitoring on their credit reports, there's a higher value on a child, and the younger they are, the higher the value is. And so if you're not doing that today, definitely freeze your child's credit reports and share that with other people that you work with. And I think that's a pretty sound piece of advice there. The reporting relationship, I think, is interesting. I don't think that most CISOs are ready to report to the CEO. I think that there is still a maturity factor in our industry of being able to understand the context of the business. I think that probably in the next 5 years that will continue to shift. I do think that with the advent of chief data officers becoming more and more pronounced in lines of business, I kind of see an expiration date on the CIO actually, but I do see the CISO eventually taking that spot reporting up after a few years more maturity. That's just my view.
Sean.
Okay. So, I mean, great points raised on the advice. I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle from within an organization. I think we should, when we think about privacy and partnering across with the businesses, with our business partners and our key stakeholders and consumers, I think it's in establishing an environment of just communication, trust and communication. I think that's, as we have that foundation of how do we engage with our business partners, and if we don't want, as an organization, to have our information, if we think about third-party risk, as Kelsey highlighted earlier, if we have to deal with third-party issues and loss of data that now has a reputational impact on our company. And I think it's just having that right balance of where's the accountability, and then trust and communication with your key stakeholders and partners, and where privacy is beyond security. We just have a lot of the confidentiality components, but there's so many other pieces to it when we think about data governance, which is whether it's CDO, whether it's the line of business owners, whether it's data lineage. And so half of the battle for us is partnering with our key lines of business. Hey, our folks who are on the trading floor doing securitization of assets, who are doing the underwriting and doing sales engagements across the country, and making sure that they understand, and how can we communicate with our partners and customers so we have a standard that we've anchored on. So I say it's really these simple principles that really set the foundation for us to move forward. The reporting structure, I would submit that it really depends on the culture of the organization. I think if you have the right team, the right culture, and the right personalities in these roles, like, I think you could have a couple of different configurations. And actually, I teach in the CRO course at Carnegie Mellon, and that question comes up all the time. Is it through the CRO, the CIO, CEO? And there are pros and cons with each of those, right? You need to be, as Anthony said earlier, you need to be you need to understand the tech teams, know what they're doing. You need to know, hey, what does, how do you do orchestration through Kubernetes so I can get the right security rules? You need to have visibility of those types of activities that you may not see from the risk office. But then on the risk side, there are business processes that are mission critical to the organization. What drives revenue, securitization processes, et cetera, that you need to have the risk lens to understand what's the impact that we have to assess within that. So there are different lenses. On the CIO role, I think some of it, the CEO reporting, I think that's nuanced. When I meet with our CEO on a monthly basis. I'm with our board quarterly, who don't have the security expertise, right? And we educate them. Our board is former CEO, PNC Bank, Harley Davidson. They're looking at 400 pages of documentation. We're a $2 trillion business. Cyber is important to our senior leadership, but making money, revenue, understanding risk and other items in so many other areas, I don't know if I would even get enough time to drive that type of discussion and understanding if it were just my CEO who has a million other priorities. So I think it's a polarity, and will that start to shift as we see environments collapse a little bit, as you kind of alluded to Anthony? And so how do we think about that a little bit more broadly? But right now it's I enjoy our relationship with our risk officer, the CIO, and then partner with our privacy team. And actually, legal is another key component that we bring in. So almost like with our privacy and legal, it's like almost like a triumvirate where we are together, and anything that's an incident or anything that we operate against, we're on the same page and coordinate. So
Okay.
I'll leave it
So,
with that.
so I wanted to come to you last because the remaining questions in my hand are specifically targeted for you. I'm going to defer on 2 of the 3 that are here on these 2 cards because they're a little bit Freddie Mac specific. So if your question didn't get covered, please find Sean later.
We're here after.
But as a retired naval officer, this other question, I mean, we've known for a long time that the reason the Army football team did not have a website for so many years was because they could not string 3 W's in a row. Right?
Hey,
Now we know the tide has turned.
Wait, who's won the past couple of games though?
The
right?
tide has turned, unfortunately. And Sean, there's a specific question for you. Will Army have a 3-peat against Navy this year?
I believe so.
4P. 4P.
4-peat.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah,
That's why I was
that's it.
surprised it said 3-peat because it'll actually.
Yeah.
They already got a website last year. So.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
Go
Yeah.
Army.
And we almost beat Michigan 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, close.
All right. So for those of you who do not have an opportunity to use your custom handmade note cards, you may keep them as a souvenir of your cruise because Anil is not going to give you any souvenirs. He's just giving you free booze and food. So with that, please give a round of applause for our panel. Thank you, Jen. All right. Back to you, Anil.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you guys very much. Again, another round of applause for our panelists. Bob Breeze, Dr. Ron Ross, Sean Calfin, Terrence Jackson, and Anthony Johnson. Thank you guys very much for serving on our panel. Was this insightful, useful? Yes? Excellent. Fantastic. All right, well, we were glad to have this opportunity to have this cruise. But wait, there's more, and we promise it won't be too long because dinner will be served shortly thereafter. So we're just going to take a couple more minutes to talk about some of the research that we have created. So if you feel so inclined, before we get to that part of the conversation, if you feel so inclined to share this on your social media, our hashtag is CSA Cruise 2019. If you feel so inclined, right? But I'll leave that up to you. So with all that said, it is my honor and privilege to hand the mic over to our research committee chair, Dr. Mari Spina of MITRE.
Thank you. Yes. Welcome aboard. What an amazing event. I still can't believe we're here. Anil had a dream one day. So I think I can say we're living the dream. But I'm here, of course, I come from MITRE. That's privacy information. And the reason I'm here is because I want to make sure that we're doing the research it takes to help essentially the government, because I support the government in just about every regulatory field that we have. We make the regulations and we build the technologies to help them live in them as well. I want to make sure that we push the research and we make impacts, we have change, we make change, and that the research represents the voice of the government. So that's one of the reasons I'm here. And most of you support our government in some way, and that's why we're kind of the DC chapter, right? So I hope I reflect some of that. But the research we do, and I'm the chair of the research committee, is all volunteer. And so my perspective on that is, where else can you get the most unbiased research and discovery, right? Because it's not particularly funded by any particular vendor, okay? And oh, by the way, I realize you're trying to get to dinner. But we have two really good research activities in process right now, and I want you to know about them. But first, I want to say that Anil talked about how do we get involved. So one way to get involved is nominate a research project, help us build a team, and help us to get that research done, okay? And there's a number of great ideas. The cloud is full of them, right? Who doesn't have a great idea in the cloud? So I want to talk about two of our activities, but I want to say that they're not the only ones. They're just the ones we're focusing on now. There's been other nominations, and one of the issues we suffer from is we can nominate research, but if we can't develop a team of volunteers to go work it, we don't get to work it, okay? So we want it to be unbiased, we want it to be vendor neutral, and we want to push the industry in the right direction. So 2 research efforts we're doing right now. And oh, by the way, if you have nominations for research, come talk to me, please. Or Anil, or anybody on the board. So the first one is, I want to talk real quick about, Katie, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. So one of them is, we call it FedStar. And what we're trying to do in the FedStar activity is understand what is the translation between a FedRAMP authorization and a CSA STAR assessment, okay? And so we formed a team, we got a 3 PAO to come, and we got a cloud service provider, and we're looking right now at what is the translation, right? Because in some way, why can't there be a reciprocity? And what would the reciprocity agreements be? So if I have a FedRAMP authorization, why can't I have a CSA STAR authorization for my product, right? You feel the government focus here. It is DC chapter. But again, it's a big effort. We need volunteers, and we may need support. I know Jack has volunteered. Katie, did you want to say anything about the effort? Just real quick.
Okay, so we're in the middle of getting a pilot together. We have a 3 PAO, we have a cloud service provider, but of course, the issue is, does the cloud service provider want to give us all this free labor when they may not, in fact, need a STAR certification? So we're working on that. We're probably going to have a truncated or a more streamlined STAR effort, just so we can see what kind of resources are needed to go from FedRAMP to STAR, which is nice to know, but the more important one is to go from STAR to FedRAMP. So if you have a STAR, how much time is it going to take you to go to FedRAMP? And that's our ultimate goal.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, then the next one I want to talk about is we had a young woman come up to us and bring up at one of our conferences a couple of months ago this notion of transitive trust. And what is trust in a world where the domain is breaking down and the boundary is now amorphous and the network is not yours, right? How do we create trust? How do we build trust frameworks? And so Simran Sarkani, yep, I said it right, didn't I? Come up, why don't you come up? Pioneered this effort. She just wrote a paper, and it's being published as we speak to the CSA Global website, and it's open for comment. And oh, by the way, every time you make a comment, I get an email. How did you do that, Anil? Mischievous. And so what we urge you to do is look for the paper, right? And it focuses on the notion of trust scoring. And it turns out that just about every trust scoring solution we looked at has a privacy impact. And oh, by the way, will it ever work then as a result? So we just talked about it. Do you want to say anything?
So we worked really, really hard on the paper. It took about 5 months because, you know, everything we do here is volunteer-based. We all have full-time jobs, of course, but, you know, research is something that I've been very passionate about since I was in university. And, you know, I couldn't have done it without Dr. Spina here. She's been an amazing mentor and supervisor. So if we can all give her a round of applause. So we have the paper actually uploaded. I think Anil uploaded it this afternoon. So it is up and open for feedback. I think it's extremely important to get other thought leaders' thoughts on it and figure out better solutions. You know, constructive criticism is what our industry lives off of. Cybersecurity is a relatively new industry, and there's a lot of gaps. We're trying to fill those, and with the help of all of you, we can do that. So I'd just like to thank you and invite you to please, you know, read the paper, like very open to feedback. Please go ahead. I want to know what you guys think. Thank you.
I had no idea I'd have accolades. Would you like to stay up just for a moment? So, again, Anil had another dream. And it's the Next Generation Thought Leader Award. And we recognize that, quite frankly, this is all volunteer. Some people have to get permission from their jobs to do this. And it's done without any special great funding. So we came up with this, and I have to read it. We came up with this great idea to sort of say thank you to the people who are doing the research, leading the research, and getting it done. And so what I want to say is that I'll kind of look at the board because I wrote it, but I can't remember what I said. But we want to recognize those who are doing the research. We want it to be a peer-elected thing, okay? And so we urge you to help us, right? Vote when you see the research, comment on it. Let us know if it's something you think is a good idea. So we think that the best idea we have today and the Thought Leader Award this go-round, is it annual? It's annual. Goes to Simran Sarkani. And here it is. And I think... So I think with that, that's the end of the slides, right? Could you all hear me? Did I miss anything? Okay. So just one more time. Anil had a dream. And we're all living it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mari. Thank you, Simran. So this research is available for free. Cloud Security Alliance-DC/research. Download the paper today. Take a look. Provide your comments. Simran and Mari are going to get an email with your comments, and we need them. So it is a draft artifact for you guys to look at. This is why our chapter exists. Our chapter exists to demonstrate that we, as cybersecurity professionals, want to make a difference in this local community. We want to help the next generation of thought leaders. Simran's literally a year out of school, right? Literally a year out of school, help the next generation of thought leaders on their journey to advance the state of the art in cybersecurity. So with that, we encourage all of you to get involved with this local chapter. Sign up for the next meetup. This is a 100% volunteer organization. All of us have day jobs. We all run our own companies. So we encourage all of you to volunteer and help us advance the state of the art in cloud security and cybersecurity. Thank you all for coming. There is a dinner now, and I'm the guy between you and dinner, but guess what? There's an open bar. So with that, dinner will be open. I'll release you guys to dinner. The bar will be open as an open bar until 8 o'clock. After that, it turns into a cash bar. We'll dock at around 8:15, yes, at which point the boat will stay at the dock until 9 o'clock. You're welcome to stay on the boat until 9 o'clock, at which point, sorry, you got to go. But we encourage you to come back in November. So again, thank you all very much for coming to our signature event of the year. If you choose to hashtag and promote this, CSA DC Cruise 2019. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen, CSA DC President Anil Carmel. Let's give it up.